Welcome. People like to say that out here you're all alone. No noise, no signal, no one for miles. But there are places where the silence isn't empty. Tonight's story, The Knock Beyond the Chain.
Black Hollow Road ended the way bad decisions usually did in northern Pennsylvania, with mud, darkness, and a half-rusted chain stretched across a logging trail no one was supposed to use anymore. Caleb Mercer killed his truck and sat in the silence. It did not settle the way normal silence settled. It did not rest. It gathered. No frogs in the ditch. No insects in the brush. No hum from distant traffic. Just the soft ticking of his engine cooling under the hood, and the sense that the woods had become aware of him all at once. His grandfather used to talk about that feeling. "You ever go into a patch of forest," the old man had said once, "and it feels less like you arrived somewhere and more like something noticed you?" Caleb had laughed back then. He was 12, and his grandfather had been 3 beers into a stormy July evening, telling stories on the porch while the woods behind the house glowed black and green under lightning. Back then, the stories had been fun. Big tracks in the creek bed, rocks thrown at the roof, long howls from ridgelines no coyotes ever touched. The old man never called it Bigfoot, never once. He only ever said, "There are old things in the high timber, and they don't care if you believe in them." Now Caleb was 34, broke, and desperate enough to ignore the old warning signs. 3 days earlier, a man named Dwight Rayner had walked into the garage where Caleb worked and dropped the paper map on the counter. Dwight was one of those men who looked permanently wet, even when dry. Sharp-nosed, pale eyes, expensive jacket, all nerves and impatience. "I need a truck and someone who knows old forest roads," he had said. One night, easy money. Easy money was how rot entered a life. Caleb had tried to say no. He really had. But his mother's roof needed repair before winter. The bank had started calling about his truck note, and Dwight had put $1,500 in cash on the counter before Caleb had finished thinking. So now here he was, just after midnight, parked at the end of Black Hollow Road while Dwight sat in the passenger seat, tapping a flashlight against his knee. "You sure this is it?" Dwight asked. Caleb looked through the windshield, at the hanging chain, the washed-out trail beyond it, and the wall of hemlocks rising into the moonlight. "This is where the county closed it." Dwight smiled faintly. "Good means fewer people." That should have been Caleb's last chance to drive away. Instead, he got out. The air smelled wrong. It was pine, yes, and wet stone, and the copper tang of creek water somewhere down the slope. But under that, there was something older, deeper, almost sweet. Not rot, not flowers, more like the scent of rain trapped in roots for 100 years. Dwight unhooked the chain from the post and let it drag into the mud. "What exactly are we doing up here?" Caleb asked. Dwight swung a pack over his shoulder. "Recovering something." "What something?" Dwight looked at him, deciding how much to lie. "Camera trap," he said finally. "Specialized equipment. My people lost contact with the team that set it." My people. Caleb did not like those words. They walked the old logging trail in narrow flashlight beams. The road had nearly disappeared under weeds and saplings, but here and there the bones of it remained. Stone drainage ditches, moss-covered culverts, wheel ruts hardened into earth like scars. Above them the trees leaned in, hemlock, pine, old white birch catching moonlight like pale skin. After 10 minutes, Caleb realized he had not heard a single bird. He stopped. Dwight kept going another few steps before turning. "What? You hear anything?" Dwight frowned. "No, that's the problem." Dwight stared at him, then gave a thin smile. "You're one of those." "One of what?" "Local boys. Every patch of woods has a ghost if you talk to the right gas station cashier." Caleb felt heat rise in his face, but said nothing. He was about to keep moving when the first knock came. Crack! It rang through the trees with a clean, wooden force. Not a branch falling, not a deer stepping on deadfall. A deliberate strike. Heavy wood against heavier wood. Dwight froze. A second knock answered from farther uphill. Crack! Then a third sounded behind them, back toward the road. Crack! Caleb turned slowly. The beam of his flashlight shook. That, he said quietly, is why people don't come up here. Dwight's expression had changed. The smugness was gone now, replaced by something bright and hungry. Good, he said. Then we're close. He moved faster after that, forcing Caleb to follow. The trail bent around a rock shelf and dipped into a shallow basin where the trees opened around a stand of ancient pines. In the center of the clearing sat a metal frame, the size of a deer blind, anchored into the ground with steel stakes and wrapped in cables leading to black battery cases. A machine, not a camera trap. At its center hung a ring about 8 feet tall. Thin metal struts shimmered across it like frost. The air inside the ring looked wrong, not empty, not full, just subtly unstitched, as if the darkness there did not belong to the same night as the woods around it. Caleb stopped dead. Dwight smiled like a man arriving at church. Oh, there you are. What is that? Proof, Dwight said, and profit. He crouched by one of the battery cases and flipped open a waterproof cover. Small green lights pulsed alive across the rig. The ring began to hum. Caleb backed dead. You told me camera equipment. Dwight did not look at him. It started as that. The humming deepened. The shimmer in the ring brightened, then darkened, then became something impossible depth. Not a reflection, not a screen. Depth. A faint landscape appeared inside the circle, blurred at first, then sharper. A vast forest under silver-blue light. Trees the size of towers. Floating sparks drifting through the air like living embers. A river in the distance glowing softly between roots bigger than trucks. Caleb forgot to breathe. It was beautiful. Not in a human way. Not in a pretty sunset, nice vacation kind of way. It was beautiful the way cathedrals must have felt to people who had never seen anything built for wonder before. Dwight laughed softly. You see it now. Caleb could barely find his voice. What is it? A crossing point. Dwight stood, and whatever uses it has been using them for a very long time. As if summoned by the words, something moved inside the ring. A figure passed between the colossal trees on the other side. Huge, upright, covered in dark hair that caught silver light along the shoulders. It paused, turned. Even through the distortion, Caleb felt the force of it looking straight at them. Then, from the tree line behind the machine, came a low brisk sound that was not quite a growl, and not quite speech. Caleb wheeled around. A shape stood just beyond the nearest pines. At first his mind refused it. It was too large. The shoulders too broad. The arms too long. His face was mostly shadow. But the eyes reflected amber for a second in the light spill from the machine. Bigfoot. The word landed in Caleb's mind, and not with excitement, but with a cold, almost embarrassed certainty. Not because it seemed ridiculous, because it suddenly seemed too small for what he was seeing. Dwight lifted something from his pack, a rifle, short-barreled, sleek, not for hunting deer. Caleb took a step back. What are you doing? Sedative first, Dwight whispered. Tracking implant if I get the angle. You said recover equipment. Dwight kept aiming. This is the equipment. The creature in the trees made that sound again, deeper this time, layered somehow, as if another voice moved beneath it. Caleb's skin prickled. There was meaning in it. Not language exactly, but intention. Warning. Boundary. Enough. Don't, Caleb said. Dwight fired. The dart sissed through the dark and struck a tree trunk with a hard thunk. Too slow. The thing had moved. Not clumsily, not like an animal startled into flight. It moved with terrifying precision, vanishing behind one pine and appearing near another, so quickly Caleb's eyes failed to follow the transition. Then the woods exploded, knocks sounded from every side, branches crashed. Something massive hit the ground to Caleb's left with enough force to shake dirt loose from roots. Another figure crossed behind the machine. Then another. They had not been watching one creature. They had walked into a perimeter. Dwight fired again and again, spinning wildly, panic shredding his discipline. One dart vanished into darkness, another struck the metal ring, and the portal convulsed. The beautiful forest beyond it warped. The humming machine screamed. Caleb threw up an arm as white blue light blasted out through the clearing. Wind slammed through the basin, not from the night around them, but from inside the opening. It smelled of cold water, flowers, and ancient bark. Dwight staggered backward and shouted something Caleb did not hear, over the roar. A huge dark form came out of the trees on 2 feet and hit Dwight in the chest. Not claws, not a mauling blow, a deliberate crushing shove. Dwight flew sideways into the ring. For one impossible second, Caleb saw him half inside that other world, limbs thrashing against luminous grass and giant roots. Then the ring snapped shut like an eye. The clearing went dead silent. No machine, no wind, no Dwight. Just moonlight, trees, and Caleb on his knees in the mud. He stayed there, gasping, waiting for something to tear him apart. Instead, he heard slow steps. He raised his head. The largest of them stood 10 feet away. Moonlight touched one shoulder, the line of the jaw, the heavy chest. It was older than the others, Caleb thought. Not in the way people meant wrinkles and gray hair. Older and bearing. Like an old bull moose or an old king. Its eyes held him with a calm so complete it was worse than rage. Around them the others moved in shadow. He could sense them rather than see them. A circle. A judgment. Caleb did the only thing that felt honest. He lowered his flashlight. Then, with hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it, he crouched and shut the ruined machine off at the battery line. The humming fragments died. The creature watched him. "I didn't know," Caleb whispered. He felt foolish saying it. Small, childlike. But it was true. The great head tilted slightly, then came a sound, unlike the knocks or the warning growls. A low sequence of tones, almost musical, rising and falling in a pattern that made no sense to his ears and yet landed in him like understanding. Not words, more like a feeling laid directly into his chest. Not yours. Keep out. Protect. Caleb's eyes burned. He did not know why. The creature stepped aside and looked toward the trail. A dismissal, a mercy. He stood on numb legs. "I'll go." The amber eyes remained on him. Caleb backed away through the clearing, then turned and hurried up the logging trail without once looking over his shoulder. He did not run until he reached the chain. When he did, he nearly fell in the mud getting it back over the post. At the truck he stopped, hands on the hood, chest heaving. The woods behind him were silent again. Normal silent this time. Not gathered, not watchful, just deep and dark and old. He drove home before dawn and told no one the truth. The police came later, asked about Dwight Rayner, about the truck, about why Caleb had been seen buying fuel and supplies with him. Caleb gave them the part they could live with, that Dwight had paid him for directions, that he had changed his mind, that Dwight went on alone. No body was ever found. A month later, 2 men in clean boots came by the garage asking careful questions and pretending not to know one another. Caleb told them nothing useful. After that, no one asked again. Winter came early that year. On the first hard snow, Caleb drove out before sunrise to where Black Hollow Road began and parked there with his thermos steaming in the cup holder. He sat in the cold and watched light slowly touch the ridge. He did not go back to the chain. He only sat and listened. Just before the sun broke the trees, A single knock sounded far up the mountain. Crack. Not a threat. Not this time. More like acknowledgement. Caleb nodded once through the windshield, though there was no one there to see it. Then he started the truck and drove away, carrying the image of that impossible world behind his eyes. Towering trees, the drifting lights, the glimpse of a place so whole it made this one feel wounded. He never told anyone about the home beyond the opening. But sometimes late at night when the world felt cheap and loud and used up, he would step out onto his porch and look at the black line of the timber beyond town, and think of what the old things in the high forest had guarded all this time. Not just themselves. A door. And the last good place on the other side of it.